The room is dark, but your phone lights your face like a small confession. You feel something, or maybe you don't. And that's the part that scares you. You're lying there, replaying a conversation you had days ago, wondering why it didn't land inside you the way it should have. Why the words mattered, but the feeling never arrived. Why you can describe your emotions perfectly, yet somehow you can't actually feel them. And somewhere beneath all that quiet thinking, there's a softer question humming. Why does everything feel muted, even when it shouldn't? Not answering that yet. Just hold it. Because this story usually starts much earlier than we expect. It often begins in small, invisible moments. A child sitting at the kitchen table, homework spread out, waiting for someone to notice they're struggling. A kid who learns not to cry too loudly because it doesn't change anything. A child who becomes easy, independent, mature for their age, not because they wanted to be, but because they had to be. Nothing dramatic happened. No single memory you can point to and say that's it. And that's what makes it confusing now. Emotional neglect doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves gaps. Gaps where comfort should have been. Gaps where someone should have said, "That makes sense." Gaps where your feelings went unanswered long enough that you stopped sending them out. And years later, those gaps feel like emotional numbness. You might notice it at night first, late hours, quiet rooms. That familiar stillness we talked about in the previous video. When everything goes silent and your thoughts suddenly get louder. You scroll your phone, not really reading. You replay old messages, wondering if you sounded strange. You avoid opening certain texts because you don't want to feel anything. Not rejection, not closeness, not expectation. You tell yourself you're just tired, or distracted, or overthinking again. But here's the quiet mystery: why does your mind run nonstop, while your emotions feel flat? Think about how you react to things now. Someone compliments you, and it slides right off. Someone pulls away, and you tell yourself you don't care. Until 3 days later when it hits you in a delayed, dull wave. You can analyze emotions endlessly. But when it's time to experience them, there's a pause. A distance. Like you're watching yourself live instead of living. Emotional numbness doesn't feel like emptiness all the time. Sometimes it feels like neutrality, like calm, like control. And for an emotionally sensitive kid, that control once felt safer than feeling everything alone. Back then, your nervous system learned something quietly, efficiently: don't expect emotional response. Don't reach too far. Don't feel too loudly. So you adapted. You learned to self-soothe with thoughts instead of comfort. You learned to read rooms instead of being read. You learned to anticipate moods, to overthink conversations, to scan faces for meaning. Because no one ever helped you name what was happening inside you. And now, as an adult, your inner world is crowded, but emotionally quiet. Notice how often you retreat into your head, walking through rooms while avoiding eye contact, sitting in silence while feeling oddly detached, standing in front of a mirror, recognizing yourself, but not fully connecting. It's not sadness exactly. It's more like emotional dimming. Like someone turned the volume down years ago and never turned it back up. You might even prefer it this way sometimes. Because feeling deeply without emotional safety once hurt too much. Here's a subtle loop to sit with. What if the numbness isn't the absence of emotion, but a protective pause that never learned when it was safe to end? You see it in relationships. You crave connection, but when it arrives, something inside you tightens. You pull back, you intellectualize, you keep things light, or you attach to people who feel distant, because that distance feels familiar. And late at night, when everything is quiet, your mind tries to compensate. It replays moments, it overthinks tones. It searches for emotional clarity through analysis, because direct emotional access still feels unreliable. That's why silence can feel heavy. That's why stillness brings thinking instead of feeling. That's why emotional numbness often walks hand in hand with overthinking. But here's the part people rarely talk about: emotional neglect doesn't just teach you to suppress pain, it teaches you to suppress wanting. Wanting comfort, wanting reassurance, wanting to be seen without having to explain yourself perfectly. So you become incredibly self-aware and strangely disconnected at the same time. You know yourself, but you don't feel yourself. Maybe you've noticed how your emotions show up sideways. Irritation instead of sadness, detachment instead of longing, numb scrolling instead of rest. You're not cold, You're not broken, you're careful. And that care started a long time ago. Pause for a second and think, when was the first time you remember feeling like your emotions were too much or not important enough to bring to someone else? You don't need a clear memory, just a feeling, a tone, a quiet realization. That realization shaped how you move through the world now. It shaped the way you sit in dark rooms with glowing screens, the way you reread messages but struggle to reply, the way you feel safest inside your thoughts, even when they exhaust you, and the mystery we opened with. The numbness, the muted emotions, the constant thinking. It's not random, it's patterned, learned, repeated quietly over years. But here's another loop, left intentionally open. If emotional numbness was learned as protection, what happens when the environment changes, but the protection stays? That's where things get interesting. That's where the story isn't finished yet. Because some part of you is still listening, still noticing, still watching these videos late at night, trying to understand something unnamed. That alone says the volume was never fully gone, just lowered. And maybe, when the room is quiet and the phone light fades, the question isn't why don't I feel anything? Maybe it's what did I learn to survive, that I'm still carrying without realizing it. We'll leave that right there. As a child, being called low maintenance sounds like a compliment. It sounds like approval. It sounds like something you should be proud of. Adults smile when they say it. Teachers nod. Relatives mention it at gatherings. They're so easy. They never ask for much. They're very independent. And the child learns quietly that this version of them is the one that gets warmth. This version is the one that doesn't cause inconvenience, doesn't interrupt, doesn't need emotional attention at the wrong time. So the child adapts. They learn to swallow questions before they reach their mouth. They learn to solve problems internally. They learn to sense when someone is too tired, too busy, too distracted to listen. And instead of insisting, instead of asking again, they simply stop asking. Not out of resentment, out of intelligence, out of emotional pattern recognition. This is where emotional self-erasure begins, not dramatically, not painfully obvious, but gently. Like turning down the volume on yourself one small notch at a time. At first, it's practical. If no one responds when you're upset, you become less upset outwardly. If comfort doesn't arrive, you stop expecting it. If your emotions don't change the environment, you adjust your emotions instead. The world feels smoother that way, safer, less unpredictable. But what isn't noticed at the time is that the child isn't just becoming independent. They're becoming invisible to themselves. They stop checking in with what they feel because it doesn't seem useful. They stop naming emotions because there's no listener on the other side. They stop recognizing their own needs because having needs doesn't lead anywhere. And eventually, those needs don't even feel like needs anymore. They feel like background noise, something to ignore. This doesn't feel like loss while it's happening. It feels like control. Control over reactions. Control over expectations. Control over disappointment. So the child grows into an adult who prides themselves on not needing much. They don't ask for reassurance. They don't demand closeness. They don't lean too heavily on anyone. They're fine, most of the time. They're composed, they're thoughtful. They're the one others rely on. But inside, something subtle is missing. The adult notices it late at night, in quiet rooms, in moments when something good happens and the emotional response feels delayed or distant. When sadness arrives days later, softened and muted. When joy is understood cognitively, but not fully felt in the body. When relationships feel strangely flat, even when nothing is wrong. This is the cost of being low maintenance too early. Because low maintenance children often become adults who don't know how to take up emotional space. They can listen deeply to others but struggle to speak about themselves. They can validate everyone else's feelings while doubting the legitimacy of their own. They can sense emotional shifts in a room instantly, but feel disconnected from what's happening internally. They overthink conversations because thinking replaced feeling a long time ago. And emotional numbness starts to make sense in this context. Numbness isn't the absence of emotion. It's the result of emotions being repeatedly unsupported. It's what happens when a system learns that expression doesn't lead to relief, so it conserves energy. It pauses. It dims. The adult might say, I don't really know what I feel, or I feel neutral about most things, or I'm not very emotional. without realizing that this neutrality is learned, conditioned, reinforced over years of self-containment. They weren't taught how to feel safely with another person. They were taught how to manage themselves quietly. So now, closeness can feel confusing. When someone offers care, it can feel undeserved or uncomfortable. When someone asks, "What do you need?" the question feels strangely foreign. When emotions rise, the instinct is to minimize them, rationalize them, explain them away. Self-erasure doesn't mean you disappear. It means parts of you go unexpressed for so long that you stop checking if they're still there. And yet, they are. They show up as exhaustion from always being the strong one, as resentment that feels unjustified, as a sense of emptiness that doesn't respond to rest or distraction, as the feeling of being emotionally full of thoughts, but empty of sensation. The low-maintenance child becomes the adult who doesn't know how to receive care without guilt, who feels uncomfortable being the focus, who fears being too much, even when saying very little, who learned that love is quiet or conditional, something you earn by not asking for it. And this is where emotional numbness becomes less of a flaw and more of a trace. Evidence of adaptation. Because erasing yourself emotionally once worked. It kept the peace. It preserved connection. It reduced disappointment. But the adult nervous system doesn't forget the rule it learned: stay small, stay quiet, stay manageable. So even when no one is asking you to disappear anymore, some part of you still does, automatically, subtly, without conscious choice. And the strangest part is that you can live a full, functional life this way. You can succeed. You can be loved. You can be admired. Silence doesn't arrive as peace for everyone. For some people, silence has weight. It presses against the chest. It fills the room instead of emptying it. It makes the air feel thicker, harder to move through. Especially at night, when the world finally quiets down, and there's nowhere left to redirect attention. Silence doesn't feel neutral. It feels loaded. For people who grew up emotionally unseen, silence was never just silence. It was information. It was the sound of a room where no one asked how you were doing. It was the pause after you hinted at being upset, and no one followed up. It was the quiet that came after expressing something vulnerable, and realizing nothing was coming back. No reassurance, no curiosity, no reflection, just the same unchanged environment. So silence became a signal. It meant your feelings didn't register. It meant you were on your own with whatever was happening inside you. It meant that if you wanted comfort, you'd have to generate it internally or go without it entirely. As a child, you learn this without words. You learn it through repetition, through patterns, through noticing that emotional expression doesn't change the temperature of the room, that sadness doesn't soften faces, that excitement doesn't invite shared joy, that fear doesn't bring closeness. So you stop using silence as a place to rest. You use it as a place to scan. When the room goes quiet, your nervous system stays alert. It waits for something to happen. It listens for emotional cues that never used to arrive. It replays conversations, analyzes tones, reconstructs interactions, searching for meaning that wasn't clearly offered the first time. That's why silence often triggers overthinking instead of calm. Because stillness once meant being emotionally alone. You might notice it in everyday moments now. Sitting in a quiet room with someone you care about, feeling an urge to fill the space, talking just to keep connection alive, scrolling your phone not out of interest but out of avoidance, because silence feels like exposure, like something might surface if you're not careful. Silence removes distraction, and when distraction disappears, what's left is whatever never had space to be acknowledged. For someone who grew up emotionally unseen, that can feel overwhelming. In childhood, there was no shared processing. No one helping you make sense of feelings as they happened. No one sitting with you in the quiet and saying, "I see that, I'm here." So quiet moments became moments where emotions stayed unresolved, unnamed, suspended. Those emotions didn't go away, they just didn't get integrated. So later in life, when the external noise fades, the internal noise increases. Thoughts rush in to fill the gap. Memories surface. Hypothetical conversations replay. Emotional fragments look for a place to land. And silence feels heavy because it's carrying years of unmet reflection. It's not that quiet itself is threatening. It's that quiet was never accompanied by emotional presence. You weren't taught that silence could be shared. You were taught that silence meant you were by yourself with your feelings. That lesson sticks. It shows up in how you respond to pauses in conversation, how quickly you assume disconnection when someone goes quiet, how your body tenses when messages aren't replied to right away, how empty rooms feel louder than busy ones. The weight of silence comes from association. Silence equals no feedback. Silence equals no reassurance. Silence equals no emotional mirroring. So your system stays active inside quiet spaces, trying to do the work that was never done externally. It fills the void with thinking because thinking feels safer than feeling without support. Feeling requires space, and space was once unprotected. You might even crave noise. Background sounds, podcasts playing while you fall asleep, music filling rooms even when you're not listening, voices talking just to keep the atmosphere emotionally occupied. Not because you dislike quiet, but because quiet feels unfinished. It feels like something is missing from it. And what's missing isn't sound, it's response. Emotional neglect trains a person to expect nothing back, to speak into silence and brace for it to stay silent. So when silence appears again later in life, the body remembers that expectation. The muscles subtly tighten. The mind subtly prepares. It's a learned vigilance. And the strange thing is that this vigilance often goes unnoticed. You don't think, I'm uncomfortable with silence because of my childhood. You just feel restless, uneasy, alert. You just feel like you should be doing something, thinking something, fixing something. Stillness feels unproductive. Because emotional stillness was never modeled as safe. The silence you experienced growing up wasn't soothing silence. It wasn't the kind that holds you. It was the kind that overlooks you. So now, silence feels like being overlooked again. This can make solitude complicated. Time alone doesn't automatically recharge. Sometimes it amplifies. The room gets quiet and suddenly your thoughts get louder. Your inner dialogue speeds up. You replay moments you didn't get closure on. You imagine conversations where you finally say what you couldn't say before. The mind becomes a stand-in for emotional attunement, because no one else did that work with you. And yet, part of you still hopes that silence might one day feel different. That it could become soft instead of heavy. That it could feel like rest instead of waiting. That being alone with your thoughts wouldn't always turn into being trapped with them. But the body doesn't forget what silence once meant. It remembers sitting with feelings that had nowhere to go. It remembers the absence of emotional acknowledgement. It remembers learning that quiet didn't bring closeness. So even now, in rooms where you are safe, in moments where nothing is wrong, silence can still carry a sense of anticipation. Like something should happen. Like someone should notice. Like you should stay alert just in case. And that alertness fills the quiet with tension.